Before introducing our speaker, I would like to say a couple words about London Yunus Emre Enstitüsü. Apart from organizing exhibition and concert, we organize talk as well, and tonight is one of them. And we have a three different seminar series, and which we have tonight is about the urbanization and civilization. Has a background in architectural design and has combined this with his study of Islamic architecture. He holds an MNG degree in architecture and environmental design from the University of Nottingham, and further MA in history of Islamic architecture completed in 2010 at SOAS Institute in London. In 2011, he was awarded research fellowship at University of Pennsylvania for his research on Andalusian architecture, and later in 2012, he began to work with Istanbul-based Turkish contractor on restoration of historic mosques. Between 2013 and 2016, he lived in Mecca, Saudi Arabia, where he worked as a site architecture and later as a restoration manager of historic Riwaqs, is that right pronunciation? Yeah. Project as part of King Abdullah expansions of Grand Mosque of Makkah. So please welcome our speaker Samie, and he will speak around 50 minutes, and then we will have approximately 30 minutes question and answer section.
Hello, can everybody hear me okay? Hello, good evening to you all, and assalamu alaikum. Thank you so much for coming. Putting this all together for you has taken a long time. You will see some of the material that I have today. I really hope that it does. I cannot do justice to the city of Mecca, but in some ways I really hope that it can inspire us and make us ask the important questions that we have about history, how we understand heritage. There's also something else I would like, if people would like to pass a book around. This has not been published yet, it's just a photo archive. If people are interested to have a look, and I have more here, so maybe at the end people are welcome to come and have a look through some of the material I have. So I have 50 minutes, I have a lot of material to cover, but to start I just want to say that the title, Mecca Through the Ages, I think it's a very broad title. I won't be able to cover Mecca through the ages at all, not even a minute amount of it. It'll just be an introduction, perhaps a passing over different periods in context to what I found being on site in Mecca. Now, to give you just a quick background, I know Brother Samati already started. My background is in architecture, but my focus is on Islamic architecture, and I was invited to work with a Turkish contractor in Mecca. And my role initially was there as an architect technician, was to see the possibility if any of the heritage in Mecca could be saved as part of the new expansion project. The expansion project was announced in 2011, and my role was to study initially and survey the old mosque and see what could be done. Over time, my role changed, and I became more and more involved in the compilation of the archives and documenting old Mecca. And as I will try to show you today, is that I had to make key decisions along with my team of restorers, archaeologists, and skilled workers on how we would reconstruct the Ottoman part of the mosque. And that is what I want to focus on today. So, so just to go over the aims of today, I won't be able to cover everything, but I hope that I can inspire some people here today, because it is a very broad audience. It's not an architect audience, or try to go as best I can.
I think you're doing very well. Thank you.
I will try to go as fast as I can and as best way I can to give you this. And because it is Mecca through the ages, I have to give you some overview of Mecca. Then I'll move on to the dismantled material, the historic material that we worked with. How we studied it, how we interpreted it, because we were left alone for a lot of the time on site. where our offices were. I was based in Arafat, Muzdalifah, Arafat, so a few kilometers away from the Masjid al-Haram. And finally, it will naturally move into the idea of reconstructing heritage. How can we really look at the key questions? So, I just wanted to, can I please just ask if somebody could remind me when I have half time left, Sabahattin? Just when I have half time, just let me know.
How much is total time?
I have 50 minutes. So we just have to know just a key point. You can read this, I won't read it over again, but the importance of Mecca in our tradition, and the Prophet, peace be upon him, he really loved Mecca. And when he was forced to leave Mecca, he turned back and said, of all the places, if I had not been driven out, I would not have left you. So this is the importance of Mecca, and we should not forget this. It is the mother of cities, and we are all indebted to it in many ways.
Of course.
So there's something which will come a bit later, it's important for me to mention, is that when we look at the Islamic art tradition, Mecca is and also in the Islamic philosophical tradition, Mecca is always the center of the world, where there are different axes all radiating towards the center. This will be an important part as I go through the material. There's been a very difficult part of my work when I was working on site, when we were trying to look at the historical material, was how do we relate what we are seeing with actual writings and actual architectural archives. Unfortunately, we have very few, and we have great narratives of people making Hajj, people from Umrah talking about what they saw in the mosque, but we don't have any scale surveys. For that, we have to go back to some of the early cartographers. So we have Ali Bey was actually a Spanish traveler, and Ali Bey was the name that he took to travel. In the Travels of Ali Bey was the publication in 1807. We have a famous British traveler in 1884. There was an Ottoman Navy officer. So there are a broad range, but generally the difficulty was that we don't have yet an architectural study per se of the heritage there. We have just these historical accounts, these foot surveys, general etchings we find in the old archives, and alhamdulillah we do have photographs. They started from about the 1880 onwards, and these were first taken by a Western photographer by the name of Snook, but later also somebody from Meccan descent, Sayyid Abdul Ghaffar. He was actually he was a Meccan himself. In terms of accounts, I mean, I could talk more about this, but I don't think it means so much for me to touch it too much in detail. But from the Ottoman rule in particular, we have from around 1517 all the way through to the early 20th century. We know that we have archives in Istanbul. At the Istanbul University, they have around 3,000 photos, but these are not accessible as yet. I know there have been attempts for them to work, but at the moment there's not been much written about them. In Mecca itself, there's Qura University have had some wonderful publications. They were a big help to me through Brother Muhammad, who's here also. He was also a big, aside for me to continue doing what I was doing. So there are people on the ground who are trying to do things, but in terms of architecture history, there's still a lot that needs to be done. So before I can move on and get into, I just want to go over some things. These are from the first photographs archives, and you will naturally see the transition over time, and you will begin to see some of the key things. And here you have the minaret just behind the Kaaba, is where the gate of Ali, Hazrat Ali, is located. This minaret was of course lost over time. We have the famous Hijazi architecture. There's if you see, there's a 3 at the top. I believe that was the mosque of Bilal. One moment, I will just check. Yes, that's the Bilal mosque that was there. It had also been removed. So there's a lot of change of Mecca, and you will see why I want to show you guys to see this image and in what context. A lot of this kind of traditional Mashrabiya panels you see, they're also lost over time. We don't see these much more in Mecca. So this is a view from the early photographs of the Mataf. again, also this is a view. I wanted to just show actually the terrain of Mecca also. For those who don't know, Mecca is a very difficult terrain to navigate, and as a world city, it is interesting because it's not a kind of place that's allows for development, because there's no agricultural land per se. It's a very hilly terrain, and it doesn't rain so much. So the environment is actually stacked against you when you're working in Mecca in terms of development. So Mecca has been, we believe as Muslims it has had dua, and this is why it's prospered over time. But as a geological landscape, it's a very difficult city to cultivate or develop.
Can you show them
raise the screen a bit?
I think
Everything is okay.
That's it.
That's better?
That's beautiful.
Yeah, okay.
That's it.
So I wanted to show you guys this photo from the 1980s. This was during the second expansion, during the King Fahd time. There was a World Islamic Summit, and all the world leaders congregated inside the Riwaqs, or the Mataf area. And there's wonderful photo archives of them praying together. And this is from that one. The first color photographs of Mecca actually came in 1952, and it was commissioned by the National Geographic. And a funny thing to say is that the first archives of the Hajj in color were sponsored by the Coca-Cola Company in 1953. So there is a lot to be said. There's a lot of catching up to do, about the kind of archives we are taking out, and and what are we doing with it. So this photo on the right, again, you can see one of it's near the old gate of Ali. It won't make much sense to you, but maybe later on, as we go through, you'll begin to understand.
It is actually Sa'i, Safa and Marwa.
Safa Marwa is, I believe,
That's the side behind the Bayt al-Khatija. Can you see the sign there, the hanging sign on the canopy?
Yes.
That is the Sa'i.
Yes. Yes, it is. And this was closed later on during that expansion and so forth. And then if you go there now, it's all indoors.
It's different.
It's like you're in an airport going for your gate,
Yeah.
So we have also these wonderful etchings from the past, which try to depict the landscape of Mecca. And this one is from depicting during the Ottoman time, and it tries to put the different mosques, it tries to show the terrain, the different courtyards that were built. And these will be very important when we talk a bit later on. It also importantly shows the domes. Now, the important thing I want to stress is that the mosque was always shown in context to the Mataf boundary. It was always, never just the Kaaba. Since the time of Umar radiallahu anhu, there has always been a boundary marking the Mataf space. Now this is a key point, because when over time the changes came about, the boundary more or less stayed the same, or it was refurbed or renovated. But we'll come a bit more onto that in a bit. We were talking about Islamic art. We had to look at a lot of. We had to look through a lot of templates, either etchings, either tiling. We had to look at drawings, maps, because these were sometimes giving us concepts that books couldn't. Because where we didn't have books, we were trying to understand. Now this is a very key nautical map, because when we began to work around the Mataf, we began to understand that different locations were marked by the columns, had different meaning. And these would in fact affect the decision that we were making. So if you look, this is a nautical atlas, so the location of each, in accordance to the compass and where each location is praying towards. Again, you can see the importance of the Riwaqs is bounding the space and the Kaaba in the center. We'll come back more to this, and then, so this is the Riwaqs which I was sent to work on. This is a structure which actually bounds the Mataf space. It's been there from the 1620s, and it's generally it's attributed to the Ottoman time. But this is possibly a mistake, because we know that they were renovated by Sultan Selim II, and the domes were added. So they were there before that. So this building you see standing, here you see it in the 1908 photograph, on the top right as well. The one on the bottom right is a bit of an extension that was done later as an imitation to the original. It's not the same, it's actually made from concrete. It was quite a good imitation for its time, because as you'll see from the plan that I'll show you, they had to make, when they changed the shape of the mosque during the King Fahd expansion, they had to imitate parts of it. So the Riwaqs have been there from prior to the Ottoman time. So that takes you through to the Mamluk period and Fatimid, and also there are people who are calling it Abbasi Riwaqs also. So which is actually what the Laden Group were calling the Riwaqs, and my team were calling it Ottoman Riwaqs, and they were calling it Abbasi. So they had lots of interesting debates in the meeting, but this was not, for me it didn't matter whether it's Ottoman, Abbasi or Mamluk. It's not an issue. Something that will come apparent later, please keep an eye on some of the features, because these are very key. You can see the rosettes and the medallions, and even in the column, you can see interesting ornaments up where the domes are. You can also see parapets used. And these parapets, if you look closely, they are different materials. So you have stone and marble also, which also began to give clues later on. There's lots of things that I can point out to you here, but for now you can just get an idea of what the Riwaqs are. They're essentially a portico with an arch, a dome on top, and it looks like a very simple structure, but when we started to dismantle it, which I'll come on to in a bit, you'll realize that it's very complicated. And when you're working in Mecca, you know, everything is difficult. You know, you have the conditions, you have the constant movement of pilgrims moving around you. So trying to get access, and then you have the Bin Laden Group, who I love also. They're also pushing you to work 3 times faster to get out. So we really had to work with a strict program. So this is a photo from the first expansion, and you can see the Riwaqs are there, but also there's been areas removed, if you can see, to go through to the same. So this is where the additional parts were put in. The bottom right, the concrete part was put in to cover up these spaces. So also they've been painted blue. If you look, the Riwaqs, when we were cleaning the material, we began to notice different layers of paint, patina building up. So we began to find that actually they'd been prone to change over time. So this was the first expansion. It happened in the 1950s, and this was actually when a lot of the destruction of the heritage sites in Mecca began. It began during that time. And this is the current expansion, the third expansion. It was announced in 2011, I believe, and it was an $80 billion cost. And the aim of this expansion was to have a 400,000 meter square increase of prayer area. And for this, they would have to go into some of the neighboring area, the Shamia district. There would be the combined project. The difficult thing for me, really, for anybody to understand was, although it was announced that the mosque would have an increased prayer space, but the end date has never really been fixated, meaning the Shamia development, which is the bottom right, extending out like an umbrella, it actually comes all the way around. And now, currently, there are plans, which I've seen only a few months ago, extending that Shamia project all the way around the side here. So when is this going to end? We don't know.
Could you point out the Palace of Abdullah?
On the left-hand side,
It's on the left.
there, just around the arch, yes.
And,
Prophet ﷺ's birthplace is there as well.
Just, you can't
Just
see it
there,
here, it's
yeah.
just
Below there.
Below there.
Yeah, yeah.
That the white building, long white building is Bayt al-Khatija with the toilets
All right.
here.
Okay.
This is just pointing out that there was in the last expansion, there was an opening where people went in and they dug out an area of land, and they discovered an old house, and there'd been a lot of work on that, and that's what the gentleman is referring to.
I see.
And so this was actually interesting because when we got to site, the idea of a restoration team working was very strange and alien there. So when we went, so even for myself, who went as an architect and later as a restoration manager, I'm not, for the task involved, I've not had the right, you would imagine someone who has many years and years of training, like Dr. Subi here, who would maybe do that. But for myself to be put in a situation where I'm making key decisions, I was really caught off guard, and I had to, work very hard, and that's where I got in touch with Ankara University, and.
But explain to us around the clock tower there. Is it apartments or something, or are they hotels, or what are they?
I'm
the
sorry?
big clock tower there.
Maybe
It's
it's a ballroom and the residence of the royal family.
Yeah, the tents.
The last floor is a ballroom, and then the private residence for the royal family, and then apartments start underneath that.
So it's all apartments.
Yes.
and
You mean
so
you mean
on.
these?
All
Yes.
that, yes.
Yeah.
And I believe
So
a
these are
gymnasium
the-
overlooking
Oh yeah,
the Kaaba.
there's a gymnasium overlooking the Kaaba as well.
Keep fit classes, people in their
Looks
shorts.
terrible.
Everything, yeah.
Okay, I could speak a lot about the tower project, but I won't because it will take
Well,
up.
if you demolish it, I would be delighted.
It will take an
I
hour.
agree.
I think we'll get rid of this picture quickly.
First complete your lecture, sir.
So this is the expansion from 2015, the photo from the tower. So this is a benefit of the tower. In some ways, you can see the project. So here you can see exactly where we are right here. We were working just then. You can see the expanse of the project, and where it was going, and the tower we were always using as a way of looking at how well we're doing in connection to the rest of the project. So we were using the tower for
I
this.
think on the 11 o'clock, the huge buildings, so many buildings there. Is that housing or hotels or what?
You mean by these ones?
No, on the left.
On the 11 o'clock.
11 o'clock.
This?
No, 11 o'clock.
Further,
This one. This one. On
11.
No.
that's
11.
12.
On the left. On the left.
Go and show.
Excuse me.
Expansion. That is expansion.
all this.
That's the expansion.
I wonder what is this?
I'm
That's-
sorry, but we will have a question time. so
That's
let's allow-
the Shamia project.
Expansion.
And
I
this
see.
project, I could talk a lot because I had some problems with this project because there was decisions being taken on this project which was so far from the Kaaba, but because of its scale, decisions were affecting the mataf space, which was problematic. Meaning, the space of the mataf where the people circumambulate around the Kaaba, it was being, the importance, because for me that's not important. That space, yes, it's a prayer space, but as a concept there were decisions made that we have to be able to see the Kaaba, so you should shift the column, and as an architect when you shift the column it changes, it changes many things. So this is I don't want to talk too much here because I have to get through a lot.
Yes. Thank you.
Okay, so we will get into the Ottoman Riwaqs and what was required and how we did it and how we started. So I brought up an old plan of Adibay, the Spanish cartographer, who had a wonderful drawing because he really highlighted where the gates are, the names, the scale. It was fantastic. And from this, we began to look at where these special gates were and where they would be on our plan. So this on the right is the contemporary plan of the mosque, and on the left is a 16th century, like you can say 16th, 17th century plan, and it's just trying to see where different things were. Where is, for example, Bab al-Rahma, where is the location of the new one? The Bab al-Safa, the Bab al-Ali, which I mentioned earlier, and Bab al-Salam. So we would use this, and then we can understand why things are appearing when we were dismantling the Riwaq structure, why they were appearing where. And this will, so we're working back in order to work forward. We created the early assessments when we got to site. We had to figure out very quickly, because we had no contract initially with the Bin Laden. We were just there initially to see what could be done, and if it could be, we would be able to work something out and stay on site. We had to work out which parts of the Riwaqs were original and which were unoriginal. So we created this plan by studying material, how it was put together, where's the concrete used, where's the natural material, and this is what we came up with. The green parts show the original Riwaqs. And I'm not sure if you remember, but if you remember the original octagonal shape of the mataf, if you look, it's more or less similar. We've retained the sides of the octagon, but you just lost the corners where it's kind of been rounded off. So this was an important starting point for us. We were given a 3D. This was done by an Egyptian team, but this didn't do anything for us because it's just a visualization. 3D is just a way of saying, you know, this is how it is. I mean, you can't see anything from this. But I thought I would show you that this was material that we went over also. So this is the plan of the new plan of the mataf, a 40% increase in area. It would allow more Hajis to circumambulate the Kaaba. And this is the kind of things that, you know, the early agreements were based on this. You can see the Riwaqs from the early stages. If I just... from the early square shape, it's now turning into a circular shape. And our plan initially on site, when we managed to show that we could save the material, was to dismantle the structure and reassemble it in the same place. But the problem was, with the shape changed, the column width changed, there are a number, the height changed. We were really stuck with the amount of material that we could reuse. So although we had saved, and I would come to the dismantle material, as much of the stone, in fact every stone was numbered and boxed, but we couldn't use it because when the column spacing is changed, the arches, you can no longer use the same arch. You have to introduce either joining pieces or you redo the whole arch. So this had to be something which had to come, and it took what should have taken a few months to agree on, it took years. And so at one point we were working there on site with no contract, with no payment to our company, and we were just working on the hope that it would be agreed that we could use the old Riwaq material and then we could reconstruct it. So we are coming now to the dismantling period. Although the Saudi Bin Laden Group is the main contractor, they gave the dismantling to us in part. In theory, it should have been us dismantling everything, but actually we're working with them in tandem, and they were doing their demolishing, and we were trying to save as much as we could, salvage as much historic material from the site as we could. So this is the early, just quickly before we begin, we start to take photos of all the material, where it is, how it is, what it says, what's the scale of it, you know. These were the surveys we were given, but they said very little because these surveys don't say which is original, which is unoriginal. We had to redo all our own surveys again and start to identify, again, green, the original material, blue, unoriginal. Each column we numbered, we photographed from every angle, which zone it is in. We've divided up the entire plan into different zones. So you can see in the rubble, we've tried to protect as much of the old material as we can. We've encased it, we blocked it off, even so if there's any heavy machinery moving around, it wouldn't affect the columns. And it was anchored and yoked out of sight from the crane that was put on top of the mosque, the Saudi part of the mosque we called it, so the bit behind us. And the crane would kind of winch out the column. And one thing which will become apparent straight away is that when something has been together, any material that's been together for hundreds and hundreds of years, whether it's stone, marble, it's lime, or even if it's concrete, that material begins to bind itself. So you can, if something is being, and these Riwaqs we mentioned, 400 years or 300, and then potentially before, the columns, when they were put in, we still don't know. So when we took out the columns, unfortunately, we weren't getting clean lifts. We were thinking that we'd be able to lift up the column and it would come out perfectly, but it wasn't. Because inside the column, again, Abbasids or Ottomans, I'm not sure, they'd used lead. They'd used basically liquid lead. They poured in liquid lead, and it kind of, and with hydraulic lime, it kind of binded the material together. It was quite an interesting assembly. And I will have more photos of this. This was when we were getting the domes done. You know, it just shows you the archways. It shows you really the conditions that we were working in, and this was very fast-paced. The one amazing thing about the mosque was that when we were looking at this old material, it was the way the arches worked together, the way the stones had been placed. It was a real masterpiece, and for us to take them apart, we had to really work hard in numbering, understanding where each stone goes and why, and then, you know, if something was broken, we had to understand why. And if you're looking at, if you know, you can see the size of this, so you can imagine, you know, it's not easy documenting every stone. I mean, in each dome which you've assembled, you can see the brickwork here. You can see the extent of it. There's a lot of work in actually in documentation. This is just to give you an overview of everything that was going on. You know, a lot of I'll have more detailed photos of this shortly, but you can see our restorers numbering each of them. And this on the top right is a very important photo. I'll come back through this, because when we worked with these columns, we began to realize that a lot of it was buried underneath, meaning that the height of the level of the mata where the riwaqs were had been changed. So if you look at the top right, on the bottom it's buried. We've just taken that out, and the top is clean, meaning that so the original level was not what it was. Again, more on this shortly, and yeah, that's just a summary of all the things that we did. This material we took onto our site, our restoration site in Arafat, and you know, we worked on it, we studied it. Initially we had to clean it, because we had to, you know, this material has been left like that for hundreds of years, and so we had to really clean it, and we used different chemicals to do that. And then once it was cleaned, rephotographed again from every angle, measured and archived. So now I would just move on to the inventory, the kind of things we worked on and compiled, and it will show you, you know, Mecca through the ages, because only when you start to look at this material you begin to realize how important it is. Many of the columns that we came across had carvings on them, so they had inscriptions. Sometimes they were surahs from the Quran, sometimes they were jumbles of words, which we still don't know why and how, but this would be a study over time. So this was just to show the cleaning process. Once that had been done, it was put into place. This is a wonderful photo, because this shows capitals. These are capitals, so if you know, capitals are what goes on top of the column. They're a way of distributing load to the column and taking it down to the ground. We know of capitals used in the Roman era and Greek a lot, because they're famous orders of architecture. But what we came across was such a diverse range of these capitals. And this one on the bottom right, I know them off by heart, but this capital, we began to call it the Egyptian capital, because it something along the lines of the old Egyptian temples that were built. So, I mean, these are all hearsay. I don't have any evidence of where these come from, but we began to compile an inventory of different styles, of different types, and then, you know, this was something that we're still trying to study and understand some of the material. Even though it's been reused now, we're still studying the photos.
It is a muqarnas in stone.
Yes. The one behind?
It's upside, no, this one, it's a muqarnas.
Muqarnas.
Yes. Which means stalactite composition and construction. This is in stone. You find it in timber and in brickwork.
I don't think this one is. I know the stalactite one. I know the Mukarnas one. I know. I'll come on to the Mukarnas one. But this one is floral. It's it's something we can discuss more a bit more. Across the back, going across, you can see the bases. Again, different styles, different places. We had over 400 capitals, over 500 bases. You know, we had, and we were finding spares buried in the ground also. So we were coming across a lot of material. This one is the Mukarnas, I thought, of the one on the right.
Yeah, it's a different type of muqarnas, yes.
Yeah, that's that. But you can see the different range of the material. These are the kind of capitals that we came across. You can see each one.
Especially the one in the middle. I mean, that is typical muqarnas.
Yes. So, but the one on the bottom right, I've never seen before. The one on the top right is very common in Istanbul, and the Ottomans used this much. The one on the top left is a beautiful capital
Yes.
of the Greek-Roman order, and then, but it's mixed. Yani there's not one particular. It's like mixed of different. We don't know where this has come from. And it was the carving on this was carved through, meaning that you could, looking at different angles, you could see through the leaves to the other side. So the carving was really amazing. Just to show you the kind of variety that we had. Again, with the columns, we had a similar thing, different kinds of columns, different kinds of marble. And for those of you who don't know the terrain, it's easy to transport material to a city that's by, like London or Paris or even Istanbul. It's very easy because you just go by ship and then but when you're in Mecca, it's really unbelievable. I mean, with the terrain of Mecca also, it's unbelievable how this material was getting there. For me, this is still a question that I'm yet to understand. And these columns, to give you an idea of their length, they're 3.5 meters long by around 70 centimeters wide. And of course, nobody can lift them. We were using 3 to 4 men to roll each column. So there are 3 or 4 men who managed to push it. Lifting, I think it was, I don't know.
Impossible.
You can guess how many.
Impossible.
So you can think how many. This one in the middle is quite interesting because we actually wanted to reuse it. There was a broken part, so we had, if you look on the far right, the material looks a bit newer than the original.
Right.
We kind of worked with it and added it on so we could reuse it. I have to speed up because I don't have much time. Again, we spoke about the inscription columns. A lot of the columns we came, the inscription had been rubbed away. We don't know why. It's like somebody had deliberately tried to get rid of the inscriptions. So what we did was, we actually got like a charcoal dust, and we would rub that to begin to see the letters, and we would photograph this. It was, although we took rub downs also every column, we documented it, and if you remember, I showed you the map with Mecca at the center with the locations. We resort back to the location the column was to tell us a story about what could be written on the column. So there's a lot of work that was done in just documenting this and archiving it. And sometimes we see surahs, sometimes jumbles of letters, sometimes we see people's names. Sometimes it's an event or just date is etched. Different things we find on the columns. This column on the top, you can see such a beautifully crafted, but someone has, with a machine, or what I understand, has tried to remove a lot of the actual original carving. And you can see across the bottom, the material is decomposed over time. It hasn't been looked after properly. The one on the bottom, much better shape. We can read that, and we reused that column. Some of the columns, the amount of, I asked my marble workers, could you reproduce anything like this? They said no, especially this one. They said we wouldn't, the intricate knowledge of how a shape curves with the carving to make all these motifs that you see. By the way, this is the same one. I just used vectorized it so you can see the pattern. So each shape kind of meets at that same point. And you're working in a 3D surface, so it's not like working on a drawing board. Phenomenal, you know, and the condition we found it in, at the top you can see, you know, there's been different kinds of plaster and concrete poured at the top of it, quickly just to cover, you know, but anyway, so we worked with it, we, you know, we studied it, and this motif is very beautiful, and, you know, we try to understand from which period it came from. We try to understand it from studying the art from that period, whether it's Abbasid or Fatimi. We don't know, but you know, this is something that's happening over time. I could talk more about what I interpreted, but it would take more time on this. There are some art historians here, maybe they can speak a bit more on this. So these are the bases that came out from under the ground or half submerged, and if you look there across the bottom, especially on the ones on the right, they're broken, or you know, you can see where the concrete was put around them. The one on the left we've cleaned and it's ready to be reused. But just to give you an idea on the basis. This was on the site during the excavation. I went down into the base to take photos so I can understand what was the original level that the Riwaqs were. So what was the original level of the Mataf? Because when you look in the old photographs, you see that the Kaaba level, where the pilgrims are moving, is the same level of the Riwaqs. But now in the mosque, so it's difficult because we're trying to work backwards. We don't have any drawings of what was done or how it was done, so we're just trying to understand from these clues. On the left you see again this unique shapes. And then we ordered all the column capital bases in order on site, and can you see the OS2, this is the zone that's going to be reused. So we ordered it up and you can see the different column types and everything. This is in Muzdalfa, getting ready to send the material to site. This is something interesting I wanted to show. When we began to dismantle the dome, we began to see very interesting, when they demolished the dome, somebody quickly called us to site because they began to see paintings that were underneath the plaster. Under many, many layers of painting, we began to see paintings. So here's our restorer. He's trying to take a rub down before the whole dome is demolished. So we compiled this, and you can see the Kaaba in the far right, and you can see these wonderful, wonderful drawings. And if these had been in any other location, these would have been protected and work would have stopped, but work went on. And we took as many rub downs of these as we could, working against the clock because we were given a time frame to get in and out, and we had to really respect that because we would have been, trampled under the machines. Again, you can see the kind of ornament we see. We saw a lot of flowers, we saw a lot of things which in our eyes were always reflecting back to the Mosque of Medina. We saw many similarities in the kind of paint that was used, and the kind of colors, the kind of style. The stylized motifs were different. They weren't supposed to be perfect, but there was something quite joyous about the way they were carried out. We reconstructed one of them just to show you how it would have looked originally. The photo on the left shows an earlier photo of the mosque before the large-scale expansions, showing the edges of the pattern. So what we did was we put together these templates and reconstructed the overall dome pattern. I really want to move fast because there's very interesting things I want to show. And so special gates, these were the original gates I mentioned, the Bab al-Safa, Bab al-Salam. When we began to work there, these were found in the bottom zone M. This is the original photo of how it looked. When we began to work there, we began to find material inside the gate, behind the stone. I will show you what I mean. This was during the previous expansion. We see photographs of it being numbered, so it is in the archive somewhere. We just haven't had access to it. But things had been moved around. I won't go into detail on that. we conducted hand drawing surveys because these would allow us to, without these we couldn't show the geometric composition of the arches. We were trying to prove that there was a theory. These arches weren't just put together by random, there was real order which reflected in the harmony of the mosque. So we did these drawings, and you know, they weren't contracted, they were done off our own back, you know, and so this was one that we did. This was a 3D, but the 3D again, it doesn't tell you much, because 3D is just an image, a flat image of what you're working with. It doesn't show you the relationships between the size and the scaling. Anyway, but it's a nice image to look at. This is the original Safa gate, what we got to. This is the Muqarnas, the top that we demolished from Bab al-Safa. And the bottom right, I will come to shortly. That's another gate we dismantled, Egyptian gate. These were the elements we took from Bab al-Safa. The element at the top right, it's a rosette, and Surah Ikhlas is inscribed within it, within a geometrical pattern. Very beautiful piece, and you know, something that was almost hidden behind concrete and these other interesting constructions. The arch to the left is one of the arches after it's been cleaned, because we wanted to reuse this. So we were trying to show that, you know, the material can be cleaned, it can be reused in the new construction. But unfortunately, because of the changing of the column spacing, we couldn't reuse this material. The Muqarnas, as the gentleman mentioned, were structural Muqarnas, so meaning that they weren't just, nowadays you see these shaped, they're just patterns. These Muqarnas were made of, each stone goes back by almost a meter. So they were very heavy stone. And if you look at that photo on the top right, each of these stones is that pattern. So again, we did hand surveys to show the composition of the Muqarna, how it works. Without these, we wouldn't have been able to reconstruct. And this was a major achievement, because we reconstructed from the debris, from the broken pieces, we put together to show that we can reconstruct this old heritage and potentially reuse it. And this took an effort of a few weeks, and some of the broken pieces had to be fit together, and behind this photo there are lots of wires holding different broken pieces together. But it was great, but unfortunately it wasn't passed and we couldn't reuse it. So it's currently being stored in Rosettes, I believe. The old medallions, we cleaned them, and you know, we got to work on them. Our craftsmen really, they agreed to work extra nights and really you have to bless them for their work, because a lot of the time they were working on things that we didn't know were going to be approved. So maybe they were working a few weeks on something, but we weren't sure if it was going to be reused even in the mosque. So they were continuously working on this. And this piece is very, very interesting, because when we were looking at the inscriptions from the back side, we were coming across these wonderful ornaments, which comes again to the idea of it being spolia, taken from where we can only guess and theorize, but you can see by the style of the carving that it's not something which is what I would say that the Muslim world, we don't have this style, but we have theories, but what we can be sure on that it was brought to site and it was used. The edges were completed, so the original shape is a kind of like a beak on each side, but if the edges were completed to make it a square, and inscriptions were made. So it was quite a fantastic piece. This is the Egyptian gate at Barber Salon. A wonderful, wonderful piece of art. And you know, we dismantled this, and you know, the best we could do with this was just take good photographs and archive it, and say, you know, this was taken from this location. Really wonderful piece, and you can see the inscriptions across the top, very florized. Yeah, so this is, we know that this is actually from the Mamluk period, and because of the style of the motifs and the medallions used, so we were calling this Mamluk gate or Egyptian gate. How long do I have?
10 minutes.
Okay. I will move on to the rosettes and medallions. because these are interesting pieces that were, if you remember from the column of I showed you in the original photos, they were like a teardrop rosette. And so these were the name of the Khalifa Rashidun, and we worked with them to restore each of these and paint them and reuse them in the new Riwaqs. And you can see the one on the right is it's ready, and any pieces that were missing because they were taken out, we reinserted a new piece of stone which matched with the original piece to make it up, and then painted it. This is an example of some of the medallions that we dismantled. Wonderful use of, there's one thing when you're working with like a tile pattern, like a tile which it just goes into the, but when you're dealing with a really heavy material like stone, to have carving and to have, find this was really an amazing achievement. We restored many of them just so we could reuse them in a, not exactly the same place, but near enough to the original location as we could, because the shape had been changed. So we got to work, and we used as much of the original material, and we added in new stone at times to make the piece complete. And then this was sent to the haram, where it would be put back into place. And then so if you go to Masjid al-Haram today, you will see a lot of these medallions there. And this is us just checking the, if you look at this photo, you can see the new stone that we've added. The little bit yellower stone across the bottom is the new stone, and the darker pattern stone is the original stone. So we had to really mix and match. But it wasn't a bad mix and match, it was as close as we could to the original material. This is, we were following the old geometry, trying to reconstruct the shapes the way we found them, because we really had to study the stones in 3 dimensions. A lot of the stones, you can't see it here, but they had grooves inside them, so they could lock together. You can't see it here, but underneath this center marble piece, there's like a groove that's deeper. So when the stone it's together, it's like a comb, 2 combined together. Wonderful, wonderful system. It meant that the whole piece could be used structurally inside the facade. So we had to work like we were traditional craftsmen, working with modern tools, but in traditional way. And this was, I think it was the first time they had done something like this in Makkah, for sure. So this was a major achievement there for the people there. This is the, just to show you that we took the inscriptions, how we made the rub downs of each inscription, just to show for our records what we found at which location. We set up our own, so this photo on the left is from a porter cabin. This is where our restorers were working in Muzdalifah. We didn't have an office, a nice office with glass, no, we had these porter cabins with air conditioning units, and we made one of the porter cabins into like a photo studio where we were photographing, archiving things. Now the next piece I want to really say is very interesting. When we were dismantling the Riwaqs, this wooden piece, this structural member you see going on across the outside, this is used as a way of binding the stone and the brick, and it binds all the different material together inside the Riwaq. It's not visible from outside. So if you're standing outside, you will never see this wood. Only when we took it apart, we learned that there was wood used. It's a very common technique, but the most interesting part was that when we took it apart, a lot of the wooden pieces had wonderful, wonderful carvings on them, and these weren't even supposed to be seen. And so we've the best we could do was to photograph, archive, document location. It's the one on the right. There's lots of ideas about provenance, but we attribute it to the Fatimid era because of the stylized motifs, and so that's attributed to the Fatimid era. The one on the left is similar in style, but not quite. We have a collection of these. And then, this was really amazing to see something, when you're dismantling, to come across something. So in the last few minutes, I've done quite well. I've got to the building stuff, which is straightforward. So this is the reconstruction. So the reconstruction was more about just using the material and putting it into place. But a lot of times, of course, we couldn't use the same material because of the change of the shape, because of the change of the columns. So we had to reconstruct. If you remember, the bases I showed you were broken. So we had to reuse or recreate new bases, similar as much as we could to the original ones. So we did surveys of the old bases. So the one in the middle here is the original base. We surveyed each contour, allowing for how it would have been. It's weathered over time, but understanding each, beveled shape, to recreate a similar base from Marmara marble on site with our team. And then this base, because the original bases, because they were broken, they were structurally very weak. So not all of them could be used. So we had to recreate bases, and then these were reused. So these next photo is just us showing the studies we were doing. Each, millimeter, working to detail, and then and our craftsman, luckily the gentleman on the top left was my very good friend. He'd actually worked on Jannat al-Baqi in Medina, the wall. He'd done Jannat al-Mualla, the wall on Jannat al-Mualla. He was actually from New York. He was Turkish, but he's from New York also, and he'd also worked on the Empire State Building. So he had a really interesting CV. And he was actually one of my key workers who was able to, lead things on the work of the bases, because again you're working in 3D to create these shapes. And here we are again, just showing how we're going from a block step by step. And then there's a new base, but the new one, the scale is different because in this location we needed a higher length. And then we had to reconstruct the parapets. Again, we had broken parapets. We had to reconstruct them the best way we could. So bottom right, we had the original ones, and then we recreated them from using the same stone. The medallions, which I mentioned earlier, the Allah rosettes which we used were done with the same stone, painted a similar way. Again, there were over 70 of these Allah rosettes that we recreated. And we call it honing, which we break into the stone to give it like a scratched effect. So it's not like a clean effect. We even did this to the rosettes because it also grips the paint much better. So we went through the details of the production. This is a bit about the stone. When we dismantled the stone, we cleaned it. This is what the original stone actually looks like. Can you see the hue? It's very saturated. It's a very beautiful stone. We sourced the same stone from Shemesi. It's non-Shemesi stone. This was what we believe is the Ottomans or Abbasi had got the stone from there. Just general studies, stone composition. We made the arches by the traditional way. We created a wooden framework, placed the stone on top, and you take away the wood, so it seals itself in place. This was the system we used to remake the river. Again, the medallions on site. This is the marble bases being placed on site, showing the capital connection with the column. And we've even used the molten lead technique, the historic technique. This is where we heat, when the original lead that we took from the dismantling, we heated it up and we reused it. So we tried to reuse as much of the same material as possible. We even tried to keep, if you look the side of the Kaaba, which side is facing, we tried to keep the same side of the columns as close as we can towards the Kaaba, because for those with inscriptions, it meant that, and we realized that where it would start, we tried to keep that same location. This is just showing the dome construction. This is the formwork in place before we put on the domes. medallion coming into place. This is after the formwork has been put in, stone has been put on, and this is where the brickwork is taking place now. The brickwork will be taken all the way to the top, and then from the bottom it will be dismantled. The wood will be taken away. This is just before we do the lime plastering. The bottom ones have been done. So with the lime plastering, we have to do a process called curing, where you don't let the material dry very quickly. And for that we used a technique, but I don't have time for that. But you can see, I mean, the dome construction, we tried to keep it regular, a similar kind of traditional construction technique. This was so before we went onto site, we had to make a mock-up in Arafat to prove that we could use this traditional method to recreate the Riwaqs inside the Haram. So this was the original mock-up that we recreated, and we spent a year and a half to make from, well, while we were doing the surveys, when I went on site and started 2013, and we were completed in 2014. And it took a very long time, because to get the material, to get the stone right, to get the material there cleaned, sourced the same stone. So this was made in Arafat, and unfortunately this has now been demolished as well. So this is no longer there. And in the background you can see the Masjid al-Nimra, the famous mosque where during the Hajj time we have the famous khutbah. And this is the Riwaqs inside the Mataf, in the new location, the circular location. And yeah, you can see the antique systems used, so we reused as much of the old material as possible. Unfortunately, we had to change the scale a bit, so they're all put on a pedestal. Each of the systems is put on a pedestal for a number of reasons, but this was not our decision. We had to work with the framework we were given, and this is an achievement on our part, because we managed to reuse a lot of the material. So the same medallions, which I showed you photos of, the same antique columns, capitals, bases, and some of the original parapets across the top. Oh, and also the alam, the dome, the finial, the dome, the stone piece coming at the top of the dome. We reused the same one. And this is a photo, is a recent photo of how they look from behind, looking into the Mataf. And this is from the other side, and you can see the rosettes there. Okay, I've gone through, I managed to get through everything very quickly. I've left a lot for the questions, but before I move on to the questions, I would just like to say that I did promise I was going to talk about Mecca through the ages. Of course, to do all of that and to do this, show you this, it wouldn't have been possible. I've managed to talk about some of the things of Mecca's formation through the ages, but I wanted to have this presentation for you, so you can understand some key points that I understood being there on site, and that is that when we study Mecca in particular, it becomes problematic for us when we begin to use the kind of framework that, as an art historian, I would use. So when art historians like to say, this is Fatimid, this is Abbasid, this creates problems. In Mecca, we have to look at it as Meccan heritage, because it's a melting pot of different ideas coming together. And if today there were different compartmentalized historical reading, it would only hinder the process of more work being done on the ground. So this is something I say, that we need a constructive narrative towards Mecca and Medina heritage.